Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to share and subscribe the channel. I found a Beastwoman in the wreckage. She won't let me leave her side. Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below with where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Liam groaned as consciousness crept back into his skull, like a hot blade being slowly dragged through fog. The air was thick, heavier than anything he'd ever breathed before, and each inhale burned like chemicals scraping his lungs. His ribs ached. One leg was pinned beneath bent alloy, and the flickering warning light of his fractured emergency beacon pulsed uselessly at his side. Through cracked goggles, he could barely make out the broken walls of the escape pod, the twisted metal framework curling like wilted leaves. The sky outside was tinged green. No, not sky, smoke, toxic. His suit's filtration system had maybe an hour left before the filters gave up completely. The crash was sudden with no warning. The cruiser was mid-jump when something ruptured the core, sabotage or accident, he didn't know. All he remembered was alarms, screaming lights going dead, and the gut punch of being ejected in a pod while the rest of his crew vanished into fire and silence. He was supposed to land on Delta 9, a supply base in a clean orbit. Instead, he was here, somewhere wrong, somewhere alive with heat and something else he couldn't name yet. Something watching. His fingers scraped for the medkit, useless and crushed under a console. He gritted his teeth and pulled his leg out from under the wreckage with a snarl of pain. His boots squelched in something thick, blood, but not his, not all of it. The pod had opened up during descent. Something must have gotten in. That realization didn't sit well, especially when he heard the first low growl echo through the surrounding jungle. It wasn't human. He grabbed the broken flare gun, one shot left, and with his other hand he found a jagged piece of piping sharp enough to stab. That would have to do. Crawling to the door frame, Liam dragged himself upright, braced against the heat and pain, and took a step into the open. What lay beyond the pod was chaos, a jungle twisted by radiation and time, plants shaped like nightmares, leaves like knives. Everything glowed slightly in the dim green mist. The air shimmered. It was beautiful in a way, if you ignored how deadly it all was. He stumbled forward, heart-hammering. Survival protocol was to find shelter, assess resources, establish a signal point, and avoid contact. The problem was nothing here felt safe, and contact had already found him. The growl came again, this time closer. Then a sound behind him like branches breaking. Liam whirled, and in that instant he saw her, or it, a creature unlike anything in the files, 7 feet tall, furred from head to toe in black, with lean muscle rippling beneath the shadows. Its eyes glowed pure white, no pupils, no iris, just twin lights burning in the merciless dark. Claws, bone white and gleaming, dripped red. She crouched low, sniffing the air, tongue flicking over fangs. Not a beast, not mindless. There was thought behind those eyes, something feral but sharp. She didn't strike. Instead, she padded forward slowly, head tilted and sniffing again. Liam raised the pipe, shaking despite himself. "Back off," he growled, trying to sound stronger than he felt. "I'll use it." The Beastwoman blinked, then she smiled. It wasn't a comforting smile, it was the kind you saw on wolves before they sank their teeth in. She lunged. Liam fired the flare on instinct. It screamed through the air between them, lighting up the jungle in white-hot flame. She shrieked, not in pain but in surprise, and rolled to the side. Before he could react, she was on him, claws pinning his wrists, fangs bared inches from his throat. Her breath was hot and wild, and for a second he thought it was over. His vision swam, then she paused, sniffed again, and said in a rough, guttural voice, "Mine." Liam blinked. "What?" She sniffed once more, then dragged him to his feet as if he weighed nothing. He tried to fight, but her grip was iron. With one powerful motion, she slung him over her shoulder and began moving through the wreckage, silent and swift, like a panther through the underbrush. He didn't understand. Was she dragging him off to eat him later, or was this some kind of protection? He tried to memorize the route, the twisted hull pieces, roots the size of buildings, broken lights flickering in the dark. They moved deeper, farther, until they reached a hidden space beneath a collapsed section of the cruiser. A den, reinforced, sheltered, scavenged from tech and nature both. Strange markings adorned the walls, claw patterns, symbols, maybe a language, not just instinct, intelligence. She set him down gently, then disappeared behind a pile of metal and vines. When she returned, she had what looked like cooked meat and a salvaged water pack. She dropped them in front of him and crouched nearby, watching. Liam sat stunned. He took a bite. It tasted like roasted something, not awful. He drank and she didn't move. Finally, he spoke. "You understand me?" She nodded. "Talk is hard, not much. Remember some." He leaned forward. "Who are you?" The beast woman tilted her head again, then tapped her chest. "Amra." He nodded slowly. "Liam." She smiled again, whiter this time. "Liam, mine now." He swallowed, unsure if it was meant as a threat, a promise, or something else entirely. Her white eyes never left his. She stood, turned her back, and blocked the narrow entrance like a wall of fur and muscle guarding him. Liam stared at her for a long time, then at the flickering walls of the shelter, then back to the jungle beyond. Whatever this place was, it wasn't going to be simple, and Amra wasn't going to let him go. The next morning, or at least what Liam guessed was morning, given the dimming glow of the mist outside, he woke to the low hum of jungle life and the heavy warmth of Amra curled near the entrance. Her back was to him, her body a tall shadow silhouetted against the glowing green fog. She hadn't moved all night, or if she had, she did it silently. Liam sat up, his body aching from the crash and from sleeping on the rough metal floor padded with old, scavenged rags and furs. He flexed his leg. The swelling had gone down, thanks to the crude wrap she'd applied during the night, but it still throbbed with every shift. His stomach growled, a reminder that survival wasn't going to wait for him to figure everything out. Amra turned her head slightly, nostrils flaring as if she'd heard the growl in his gut. She rose without a word and disappeared outside. Liam had no idea if that meant she was hunting, patrolling, or simply giving him space, but it gave him a rare moment alone in her strange shelter. It was more than a cave, the way it was structured. Reinforced metal slabs arranged into walls, vines carefully pulled aside to create paths, old tech systems salvaged and repurposed as light sources or barriers. This wasn't just some makeshift hideout. Someone, likely Amra, had spent a long time shaping this wreckage into a kind of home. That thought unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. He pushed himself to his feet and began exploring, carefully limping slightly but determined not to waste the opportunity. On one wall, he found a half-melted console panel still wired into a weak power cell. It flickered to life when he touched it. The screen was cracked, half the text unreadable, but he recognized the ship's logo, S-Haven Song, his old cruiser. Data logs were partially corrupted, but he navigated through them with practiced fingers, bypassing broken menus and rerouting basic functions. A few logs came up, project names, experimental units, something called Feral Initiative. He barely had time to process it before the console glitched and powered down, the ancient battery finally giving up. Before he could dwell on it, he heard her. Amra had returned, not with food, but with a predator's limp body slung over one shoulder. Its throat had been torn out cleanly, and it still twitched. She dropped it with a loud thud, then tossed Liam a piece of scavenged fruit. She crouched nearby, claws working to peel the creature open with swift precision. He ate slowly, unsure if the fruit was fully safe, but it was sweet and watery and better than starving. "You made this place," Liam said after a while, watching her carve into the beast's flesh. She didn't respond immediately. Then, after a pause, she looked at him and nodded. "Long time alone," she murmured, her voice rough, still awkward but getting clearer. "Ship, fall, fire, I live, others not." "You were on the ship?" he asked, carefully brushing ash off his pants as he leaned against the cold wall. "You were crew." She hesitated. "Experiment." The word hit harder than he expected, so the logs were real. The Feral Initiative, genetic augmentation, animal traits spliced with human DNA made for combat, survival, territory defense. The kind of thing banned by every civilized system. He remembered rumors, special units designed to survive in impossible conditions, faster, stronger, more instinctive than regular soldiers. Most were scrapped after a few scandals, or at least that's what official records claimed. Amra must have been one of them, left behind when the project fell apart or when the ship went down. And she'd survived, adapted, endured, all alone. She looked at him again, sensing his thoughts. "You judge." Liam shook his head. "No, you're the reason I'm alive, that's all I need to know." A strange softness entered her eyes. Then not quite gratitude, something else. She moved closer, not threatening, but as if she wanted to be near. Her presence was heavy, wild, but not unkind. He noticed how she never let her back face the entrance unless she knew he was asleep, always watching, always guarding. Whether she saw him as a companion, a responsibility, or something more, he wasn't sure yet. He spent the rest of the day gathering what he could. Amra let him move around freely, now following him from a distance but no longer treating him like a flight risk. He scavenged pieces of tech, repurposed broken panels into solar reflectors, and managed to rig a basic water collection unit under the leaking fuselage near the bunker. It wasn't much, but it meant he was contributing, and that mattered to him. He wasn't going to sit back and be the helpless guy in the background. Not here, not after everything. Later that night, as the jungle came alive with the haunting screeches of predators and the pulsating glow of bioluminescent spores, Liam and Amra sat near a small heat unit scavenged from the escape pod. He showed her how to adjust the controls for maximum warmth without burning through the remaining fuel too fast. She watched closely, nodding in approval and even mimicking the movements after he explained. "You learn fast." "Must learn alone, die." She spoke the words plainly, but there was something behind them, pain, maybe, or memory. He didn't push, not yet. Instead, he asked, "Have you ever tried leaving the wreckage, going beyond the jungle?" She shook her head. "Out there it's more dangerous. Here I know, here I control." "And now I'm here too," he said. She looked at him, her white eyes reflecting the fire's light. "Yes, now I protect both." There was no hesitation in her voice, no doubt. Liam didn't know how to feel about being claimed like that, but part of him didn't mind, not when it meant he didn't have to fight alone. Not when every part of this planet screamed danger and uncertainty. Whatever Amra was, whatever past she carried, she had chosen to save him instead of killing him. And in a place like this, where every sound could mean death, that choice meant everything. He leaned back, watching the glow dance across the jagged ceiling of their shelter. She curled up near the entrance again, head resting on her arms, claws in the dirt, eyes wide open. Liam closed his own eyes, letting the warmth and exhaustion lull him towards sleep. For the first time since the crash, he didn't dream about dying. The rain came without warning, loud and violent, hammering against the shattered metal of the wreckage like falling stones. Liam woke to the deafening sound of it, a low roar that made the jungle shiver. He sat up quickly, disoriented, momentarily unsure whether it was another explosion or just the strange weather patterns of the planet. The glow of the spores outside had faded, replaced by streaks of dull gray light filtered through thick storm clouds. Wind howled through the gaps in the metal, and thick sheets of acidic rain poured from the sky, hissing as they hit exposed surfaces. It wasn't just water. This place didn't allow anything that simple. Amra was already up, crouched by the entrance, her fur damp but her posture calm. She didn't seem worried, just alert. Her eyes, bright and watchful, scanned the shifting trees beyond the wreckage. When Liam stood, rubbing sleep from his face, she turned toward him and gave a low grunt. "Storm, bad, burned skin, stay inside." Liam nodded and pulled on his damaged suit, sealing the collar tighter as an extra precaution. He moved past her, checking the water collector outside the shelter. The glass tubing he'd carefully constructed was already starting to melt under the rain's touch. He cursed under his breath and grabbed what he could before retreating. Amra watched him as he sat back down, his hands red from contact with the acidic mist. She reached out and gently wiped one of them with a damp cloth, her movements slow, precise, and strangely careful for someone with claws that could cut metal. "We need a better setup," Liam muttered, glancing at the scorched remains of the water unit, something covered, insulated. "This whole place is a trap waiting to happen." Amra nodded slowly, then pointed toward the deeper sections of the wreckage. "Down there, more ship safe, maybe things." "You mean storage?" Liam asked, frowning. He remembered that area, engineering decks, sealed compartments, dangerous but maybe still intact. He stood and looked at her. "All right, let's go check." She grunted in approval and led the way, moving through the twisting corridors of broken steel and overgrown vines as though she had walked them 100 times. She had. It became clearer the more he followed her. She knew this place like it was home. Every turn she made, every silent signal for him to duck or step wide was made with confidence. She mapped out the wreck with instinct and patience, learned where it was safe, where it was rotten and liable to collapse. Liam found himself impressed, not just with her strength but with her discipline. They descended deeper into the wreckage, the air getting colder, the light dimmer. Liam kept one hand on the wall for balance, his boots slipping occasionally on the slick metal floor. Amra barely made a sound. When they reached a partially sealed hatchway, she crouched and listened, then pried it open with a grunt. Inside, the room was dark but Dre likely sealed off during the crash, its system still half alive. He could see storage crates, locked panels, and a workbench covered in dust. Liam stepped inside and began checking the containers. Most were cracked or burned through, but a few still held valuable supplies, spare power cells, dried ration bricks, even a damaged data pad. He handed one of the bricks to Amra, who sniffed it suspiciously before taking a bite and shrugging. It wasn't good, but it would keep them going. He pocketed the power cells and carefully activated the data pad, its screen flickering to life. The logs were mostly corrupted, but some of the entries were still intact. His eyes scanned through names and schedules until one entry caught his attention. Feral Subject 7, Amra, strength stable, intelligence higher than projected, shows signs of emotional bonding, instinctive guarding behavior growing more apparent. Subject responds well to positive reinforcement, particularly physical proximity. Recommend containment before project termination. Liam stared at the log, then glanced toward her. She had settled against the wall, chewing through the ration with casual indifference, but he could see the faint twitch of her ear, as if she sensed what he was reading. She didn't look at him, but I could feel her tension rise. Slowly, he closed the data pad and set it aside. "They didn't deserve you," he said quietly. "You were more than they understood." She didn't reply, not for a long time. Then softly she spoke. "They made me to fight, to kill, but I wanted peace." Liam stepped closer, crouching beside her. "You saved me. You're still saving me. That's what matters now." Her eyes met his, those strange white eyes without pupils, glowing in the dim light. There was something deep in them, not just intelligence but weariness, as if she had waited a long time to be seen as something more than a weapon. Then the moment was broken by a loud clatter from behind one of the storage walls. Liam shot to his feet, hand on his tool pipe. Amra was already moving low and silent, slipping around the crates toward the source. He followed carefully, pulse racing. Another crash, this one sharper, not an animal, something mechanical. They rounded the corner and froze. A drone, scavenger class, old military model modified with red stripes and cracked optics, scanned the area with a soft humming noise, occasionally firing a weak pulse into the walls, checking for energy signatures. It hadn't spotted them yet. Liam crouched low. "That thing shouldn't be active. They were decommissioned years ago." "Not alone," Amra whispered. "Where one goes, more come." They backed away slowly. Liam's mind raced. If scavenger drones were here, that meant someone else was on the planet, maybe the same people who'd brought the ship down in the first place. They weren't just salvaging tech, they were cleaning up loose ends. And Amra, she was one hell of a loose end. They returned to the shelter quickly, avoiding open paths and climbing through collapsed bulkheads until they were safely back inside. The rain was still pouring, even harder now, acid tearing at the world outside. Liam sealed the entry point with a heavy metal slab and turned toward Amra. "We need to prepare," he said. "If they find us, they won't care that you saved me. They'll try to capture you or worse." Amra crouched by the fire unit again, claws tapping the floor in a steady rhythm. "Then we don't let them." He nodded. For the first time, they weren't just surviving the planet. They were surviving a bigger threat together. And Liam was beginning to realize that this feral woman, this supposed failed experiment, was his best chance not just of staying alive, but of finding something real in a universe that had long since stopped making sense. He looked at her again, her fur damp from the rain, her white eyes catching the light. She wasn't a beast, she wasn't a project. She was Amra, and he wasn't going anywhere without her. The acid storm raged for hours longer than Liam expected, battering the outer layers of the wreckage with relentless, hissing force. The sky outside the bunker glowed a sickly green, and streaks of corrosive mist slipped through cracks in the fuselage like creeping fingers. Inside, however, the shelter remained stable, thanks to Amra's careful placement of scavenged panels and layered vines. It was far from comfortable, but it was safe, at least for now. Liam had spent most of the past hour reinforcing the entrance, welding together a mix of old metal and carbon rods to form a crude barrier, hoping it would hold if the scavenger drones returned. Every clang of his tool echoed too loud, and every pause felt heavier than it should have. Amra didn't speak much, but her eyes never stopped moving. She could sense more than he could. She was listening to the jungle. When he finally sat down to rest, muscles aching, he noticed she hadn't moved from her place by the wall. Her claws flexed in and out slowly, not in threat but in thought. The silence between them was thick but not uncomfortable. They had settled into a rhythm, even if neither of them had acknowledged it out loud. Liam leaned back against the wall, resting the welding torch on his lap, and looked at her. "You fought them before, haven't you?" he asked. Amra's head turned slightly. Her voice came low, roughened by time and disuse. "Once, long ago, before the crash, drones, men, they came with chains." He nodded slowly, not needing her to explain further. She'd been hunted even back then, before the ship had fallen out of the sky and turned into this jungle graveyard. Whatever Project Frel had been designed for, she hadn't followed its rules. She wasn't a mindless brute or a controlled weapon. She had rebelled, and that, more than anything, probably marked her for death. "I think they're here to erase whatever is left of the project," Liam said. "You, the data, anyone like you clean up the mess, tie off loose ends." Amra didn't flinch. "I know." Then, after a moment of pause, she added, "I don't run." Liam believed her. She said it with quiet conviction, not pride. He knew that kind of stubbornness. He'd seen it in soldiers before, the ones who knew retreat wasn't always an option. He wasn't a warrior, not like her, but he wasn't helpless either. He could think, build, adapt, and maybe that was enough to make a difference. He rose to his feet and grabbed the salvaged data pad he'd recovered earlier. It flickered, barely holding power, but he managed to pull up a rough layout of the crashed ship. Most of the data was corrupt, but a few sections still glowed faintly. One of them was the uplink core, buried deep beneath the engineering decks. If they could reach it, he might be able to reprogram the communications array to send out a proper distress signal. Not a standard SOS, but a hidden code, a tech handshake used by scrappers and ex-military personnel. If someone out there still monitored the old networks, they might pick it up. It was a slim chance, but better than waiting around for another drone to show up with guns and orders. "We need to reach the uplink core," he said, showing Amra the screen. "It's deep, but if we get there, I might be able to call for help, real help, not these cleanup teams." She studied the map, claws tapping at the screen, eyes narrowing as she followed the highlighted path. "Too far, Vince-blocked paths, broken. We can clear them. You've got the strength, I've got tools between us. We can push through." She considered him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "We go tomorrow." That night they didn't speak much. The storm died down, but the tension remained. Liam cleaned his tools, reorganized supplies, and laid out a rough plan for how to breach the old corridors. Amra sharpened her claws against a piece of scrap metal and sniffed the air every few minutes, her senses constantly checking for danger. At one point, she surprised him by reaching into her cache of hidden gear and pulling out a small, cracked visor. She handed it to him without a word. He turned it over in his hands. It was an old scanning unit, mostly dead, but still capable of reading heat signatures. With a few tweaks, it might just give them the edge they needed if something was waiting in the dark. When he looked up to thank her, she was already curled up by the entrance again, eyes half-lit but still alert. He wanted to say more, to tell her that he trusted her, that he wasn't planning to abandon her. Not now, not after everything. But the words felt strange in his throat, and he wasn't sure how she would respond. So instead he sat in silence and let the weight of the moment settle around them. The next morning they set out just after dawn, navigating the twisted remains of the cruiser's hull, weaving through collapsed decks and corroded pathways. The deeper they went, the more the jungle faded, replaced by stale air and the creak of decaying metal. Liam moved cautiously, checking the map, while Amra stayed ahead, clearing rubble and pushing aside obstacles with ease. They worked in sync without speaking, their understanding built from days of surviving side by side. At one point, they encountered a partially collapsed hallway blocked by rusted steel and thick cables. Liam studied it for a moment, then handed Amra a small explosive charge carefully built from scavenged materials. She took it, eyed him with approval, then placed it where he pointed. The detonation was small but effective, clearing a path just wide enough for them to squeeze through. The deeper they went, the colder it became. They passed through crew quarters filled with skeletons, medical bays overrun with moss, and finally reached the reinforced bulkhead leading to the uplink chamber. Liam began working on the panel, fingers moving quickly over exposed wires, rerouting power from an old emergency battery he'd brought. Sparks flew and the door groaned open. Inside, the core chamber stood mostly intact. Central consoles blinked weakly, and the main uplink tower still hummed, buried under layers of disconnected code. Liam got to work, eyes narrowing in focus. Amra stood guard, her back to him, claws out, watching every shadow. He was halfway through the upload when he heard her growl, low and dangerous. He looked up, heart jumping. From the corridor behind them came the unmistakable whine of a drone's power coil. "They found them," Liam thought. He locked the signal upload and grabbed his pipe, moving to stand beside her. She looked at him, eyes wild and white. "No running," he said. Amra grinned, showing fangs. "Good," and then they charged. The drone came into view like a ghost cutting through fog, sleek, black, and humming with deadly intent. Its red optics flared as it locked onto them, and Liam didn't need a warning to know what was coming. He dropped low behind a console just as the first shot ripped through the air, searing a line across the wall beside him. Amra didn't flinch. She moved like a streak of black lightning, springing from her position and crashing into the drone mid-flight. Metal shrieked as her claws tore through its outer shell, sparks flying in every direction. The machine fought back, limbs spinning, shock pulses surging from its joints. But she didn't let go. She ripped into its core with precision that came from experience, not frenzy, and it dropped in a heap of smoking metal and fizzing wires. Liam got back on his feet and rushed over, checking the wreckage for trackers. Sure enough, a blinking transmitter was embedded in the drone's remains. He yanked it out and smashed it beneath his boot, but the damage was already done. If this drone had found them, more weren't far behind. He glanced at the console behind him, which still displayed a green light. The signal was broadcasting, but for how long he couldn't be sure. The uplink was old, barely stable, and the power source they'd rigged wouldn't hold indefinitely. They'd need to return soon to check if the message had gotten through, but they couldn't afford to stay there. Amra was already scanning the corridor, her breathing steady despite the exertion. She looked at him and motioned toward the other side of the chamber, where a service shaft might lead to the auxiliary engineering decks, another route back to the shelter, away from the paths the drones were likely to search. Liam nodded and grabbed his gear. They didn't need to talk now. There was only one choice: move fast, stay quiet, and don't get pinned down. The shaft was tight, barely large enough for Liam to crawl through comfortably, and Amra had to squeeze herself in with careful, almost unnatural flexibility. The old service lights flickered above them as they slid through, boots and claws scraping over rusted metal. The air grew damp again, and the jungle's distant calls began to return as they neared the outer levels of the wreckage. Somewhere above them, wind howled through a breach in the hall. The storm had passed, but the sky had shifted to a darker hue, twilight or something close to it on this cursed world. They exited the shaft into what used to be a maintenance bay. Amra helped Liam down from the ledge, and they paused there for a moment, catching their breath. The smell of ozone lingered in the air, mixed with jungle rot and scorched metal. Liam looked around, spotting signs of recent movement. Disturbed branches, faint drone tracks imprinted in the soil, and something worse, a boot print fresh and human. "We're not alone anymore," he said quietly. Amra's claws twitched. "Hunters," she growled, "sent after me always." He frowned, thinking back to the data logs. Project Feral subjects weren't just abandoned, they were hunted. The cleanup crews sent after them were trained, ruthless, and never failed. They didn't leave survivors. If someone knew Amra was still alive, they wouldn't stop until she was. They moved quickly, ducking beneath fallen beams and weaving through overgrown corridors. The jungle seemed even more alive now, as if it sensed the encroaching presence of outsiders. Creatures hissed in the distance, and strange shapes flickered behind the trees, but none dared approach, not with Amra leading. She moved with purpose, more focused than Liam had seen her before. Every movement was calculated, every breath quiet. Her eyes stayed sharp, flicking from shadow to shadow as if anticipating the strike before it came. It wasn't until they were almost back at the shelter that things went wrong. A low beep echoed through the air, and before Liam could react, a pulse grenade detonated nearby, sending both of them sprawling. His ears rang, vision blurred, and muscles locked up from the electromagnetic blast. He tried to move, but his limbs responded sluggishly. Amra was already staggering back to her feet, snarling and shaking off the effects faster than he could comprehend. A squad of 3 men stepped into view, armored, armed, and clearly experienced. They didn't look like mercenaries, they looked like specialists. "She's the last one of them said, raising a compact energy rifle. "Orders are to bring her in alive if possible." "Stay down," another barked at Liam, aiming his rifle at him. "You've got no idea what you're messing with." Liam gritted his teeth, dragging himself behind a chunk of metal as the soldiers closed in. Amra stood her ground, lips curled back, her stance low and ready. "He's mine," she snarled, voice deeper and more primal. The soldiers hesitated. They weren't used to hearing speech from their targets. That gave Liam just enough time to grab a sharp piece of rebar from the debris beside him. Amra launched herself forward without warning, crashing into the lead soldier with enough force to break bone. His rifle clattered away, and she spun, lashing out with a backhand that sent the second man tumbling into the jungle undergrowth. The third opened fire, but Liam, shaking off the last of the pulse effects, lunged and slammed the rebar into the weapon's barrel, knocking it aside as the shot fired wide. The man turned furious, but Liam didn't give him time to recover. He drove the bar into the man's side, and Amra was there a second later, finishing him with a swift, brutal strike. Breathing hard, Liam leaned against the wreckage, staring at the aftermath. Blood soaked into the jungle soil, and the only sound was the whirring of dying equipment. He looked up at Amra, who was breathing heavily but steadily, her fur streaked with sweat and grime. "That was close," he muttered, wiping blood from his face. Amra stepped closer, eyes locked on his. "They'll come again." "More," he nodded. "I know, but we're not going to just wait anymore. We fight smart together." She stared at him, and for the first time he saw something behind her glowing eyes. A flicker of vulnerability, quickly hidden. "You stay?" she asked, voice softer. "I'm not leaving you behind," he said. "You saved me. Again and again I'm with you no matter what comes." Amra tilted her head slightly, then stepped forward until they stood barely inches apart. Her claws reached out gently, resting against his chest. "Then I protect you always." It wasn't a claim this time, it was a promise. And Liam, without fear or doubt, accepted it.